Hello, I am Acharya DharmAnanda, and in this talk I'll be speaking to you about the Four Noble Truths. Now, before I get started, because this is my first talk, I want to speak to you about a couple of things respectively whenever I get to those points that I'll be doing at the beginning and end of my talks. Now, at the beginning of each of my talks, after I tell you what I'm going to be speaking about, I'll be saying a chant. It is Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. And this translated into English means honor to the Blessed One, the Exalted One, the Most Highly Enlightened One. Now what this means is I'm giving thanks to the Buddha, who is originally credited with bringing these teachings that I'll be speaking to you in my own words, so that we may learn from them and then of course teaching them to others as I'm doing in this video. So as I said, I'll be speaking to you about the Four Noble Truths. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Now with the Four Noble Truths, before I get started, you've probably heard about them before, read about them, learned them from someone else, and typically the Four Noble Truths, they are the four foundational pillars of Buddhism. But they're usually taught in regard to how to live one's lifestyle in the Buddhist practice. And now while that is very true, very correct, they were originally taught by the Buddha based upon one's meditation practice. The Four Noble Truths were actually the very first teaching that the Buddha ever gave after attaining full and complete enlightenment. And he first taught them to a group of 5 ascetic holy men who had first been taking care of him while he was on his journey to seek enlightenment, and then they eventually left him because he strayed away from the path of self-mortification, starving himself because he realized that didn't get to enlightenment, and they thought he'd left the path and was no longer going to seek after enlightenment. And well, he didn't do that. He found a middle way between the extremes of a decadent, luxurious lifestyle and the extreme of a very ascetic self-mortification type of lifestyle, and used that to attain enlightenment. And well, once he decided to teach it to others, he went to find them to teach them. And now the thing with this is that the ascetic holy men, they were living an ascetic holy lifestyle, basically. They were living properly. They weren't killing other beings, they weren't stealing, etc. So using the Four Noble Truths as a way to live one's lifestyle was not really necessary for them to learn because of the fact that they were already living that proper lifestyle. So the way the Buddha taught it to them was how one approaches the meditation practice through the middle way that he had discovered. So of course, while I said that using this as a way to live one's life is very correct, very true, it's not actually whenever it gets to the actual practice as a whole, there needs to be a more rounded aspect of the meditation practice too. And now why do people also teach the Four Noble Truths as a way to live one's life as opposed to the meditation practice? The main reason for that is because once the Buddha was not just teaching monks, but monks and holy men, he was also teaching the lay people, the non-monastics, basically the farmers and etc. There had to be a way about living one's life because they weren't living the holy lifestyle that the ascetics were, the holy men were living, where they basically lived a very rigid set code to be able to be holy people. So there needed to be a way to live one's life, a code of conduct, as you will. And of course, the Four Noble Truths was that first code of conduct. Here, since there's been a lot of talk about how to live one's life based around the Four Noble Truths and how the lifestyle works, I will actually be using this and teaching it as how to approach one's meditation practice. So we'll get started with that. Now, the first Noble Truth, there is a bit of misconception and misunderstanding here with the first Noble Truth. Many people believe that because it was the first Noble Truth, it was actually the most important. The first Noble Truth is there is suffering in life. Now, while it is the first Noble Truth, it's not necessarily the most important. All of them are just as equal as others. The Buddha gave the analogy of them being like the legs of an elephant. all of them had to be the proper strength, the proper distance apart, and everything for an elephant to have the appropriate balance. And so these are all just as equal, but because the Buddha talked about suffering, that does not said that there was suffering as the first noble truth. That does not mean that all he taught was suffering. There is also another reason why, and this is the primary reason why. There are two reasons why, actually, I should correct myself. There are two reasons why that the Buddha taught suffering is the first noble truth. First, suffering is everywhere. It's very prevalent. You see it all over the place. Now in our modern age, you turn on the news, read a newspaper, whatever, watch TV, watch any of the numerous shows that are on TV, the dramas or reality shows, and they're all about suffering. You can't get away from it. Suffering is everywhere. You suffer in your own life. Other people that you observe and have contact with, they're suffering in their lives. So it is very prevalent. So it was very easy to find to begin with. And now the second reason is that the Buddha was teaching a means to an end. He was teaching a specific path that had a specific start point and specific end point. And that is the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path being the fourth of the Four Noble Truths. He was teaching an end to suffering. And to have an end to something, you have to have something to end to begin with. And so that's what he was actually talking about here. He's looking for an end to suffering, so suffering had to exist to begin with. So you have the thing that you're trying to end. There is suffering. Okay? Now, with suffering, if you're trying to end something, you have to know what its cause was to end it. I'll give the analogy of like suffering is a weed in a vegetable garden. Now, you know that just pulling up a weed, the part of the weed that's sticking out of the ground isn't going to do anything. There's actually a root system of that weed, and that's actually the problem with the weed being in the vegetable garden. The root system gets up and tangles in with the roots of the vegetables and other plants, other beneficial plants in your garden, and it strangles those roots, and it takes the nutrients, steals the nutrients that those beneficial plants, plants and vegetables need in order to properly thrive and survive and be healthy. So what do you do with a weed? You have to pull it up by its root. And just as that root is basically the cause of the weeds, of the issues with the weed, there's a cause to suffering. That is the main issue with how suffering comes up. And now what is that root cause of suffering that needs to be removed? That root cause of suffering is craving. And that's the second noble truth. The cause of suffering is craving. Now what is craving? Craving is the I like it and I don't like it mind. Now the Buddha taught there are three primary types of feeling. There is pleasant feeling, there is painful feeling, and there is neutral feeling. And all other types of feeling, because the Buddha taught up to 108 different kinds of feeling, but all of them basically have these three types of feeling as their base root. Now, whenever it comes to having a pleasant, painful, or neutral feeling, this craving is there, and this craving should not be considered attachment. It's not attachment. This is actually before attachment. There is a process in which craving is a part of, and craving is the cause of clinging in this process that leads up to suffering. Because on the very gross level, you see there's suffering, and the cause of suffering is craving. But there's a small, minute one that has more details that I'll get into in another talk, where craving is the cause of something else. It leads to something else that leads to something else that leads to suffering. And now craving and clinging together, that is attachment. And that's the definition of attachment, and I'll speak about that at a later time. But I just want to get that out there, that craving is not attachment. It is before attachment. It is what causes attachment. And how does that happen? Well, there's a pleasant feeling. You like that pleasant feeling. Let's say you're getting a good massage, or you're in a nice tub of water, and it's the perfect temperature, and it's a very pleasant feeling. Or you're eating your favorite type of candy, and it's a very wonderful taste sensation. It's very pleasant. You want that pleasant feeling to stay, but there are basic underlying causes of existence that that inherently all things are all conditioned phenomena, all things that we're able to experience and describe are impermanent. They are subject to change, and they do not last forever. And so eventually that good feeling will leave, and your craving is the desire for that feeling to stay. Your like of that feeling, you want it to stay. And then the clinging becomes that strong urge to make it stay. You try to fight to make that good feeling stay. And then the suffering comes when that feeling inevitably goes away and you can't keep it anymore, and you want it to come back, but you can't make it come back because you don't control that feeling. And the same goes with unpleasant feeling. You stub your toe and it hurts. You don't like it. You want that feeling to go away, but you can't make the feeling go away because you can't control the feeling. And so your dislike of that feeling, that is the craving. Your strong desire to make the pain go away, that's the clinging. And that's where the attachment is bred and suffering is caused because you can't make the feeling go away. Now, with that, the third noble truth is how you bring up the root. Because if you know with a weed, you can't just pull up the weed and expect the root to come out with it. You have to dig out around the root. Make sure you grab the weed properly if you're using the manual method of pulling up a weed at the root. You have to check and make sure that there's no more of the root remaining, because if there's a piece of the root of the weed remaining, it can regenerate and regrow itself. And then also, if you're using weed killer spray, you have to spray it properly. You have to wait so long before you try to get rid of the root if it doesn't wither away and die on its own and all of that. There's a process to removing that, and that's what we're talking about here. And now, with the cessation of craving, the pulling up of the root of that weed, comes the cessation of suffering. Craving is the root of the weed of suffering, and with the pulling up of that root comes the dying of the suffering. And now, the fourth noble truth is the Noble Eightfold Path, and this leads to the cessation of suffering. This is, as I just said a few seconds ago, this is the process about how you remove the root of the weed of suffering. And now, before we get deeper into this, I want to talk about a little bit about the translations here that usually come with what the Noble Eightfold Path is. The Noble Eightfold Path is typically translated from the Pali or the Sanskrit as right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right practice, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Now, whenever it comes to these words, they were originally translated into English by a scholar named Rhys Davies. Rhys Davies was the first ever person to translate the Buddhist text from Pali into English. And while this was a great benefit for humanity because this allowed the Buddhist scriptures to be translated into other languages around the world and to disseminate this great wisdom to the rest of the world, Rhys Davies was very much a scholar. It did not actually practice what the Buddha taught. So Rhys Davies thought that this, what the Buddha was talking about, was primarily a philosophy and a way of living one's life. While it is a lifestyle and it can be a way of living one's life, and there are certain metaphysical aspects to it, the Buddha mostly taught roughly 90 to 95% of what he taught was based upon one's practical application, one's active practice of his teachings. Everything he taught, the majority of stuff he taught, can't actually really be understood properly unless you're actually doing the meditation practice that the Buddha taught. And that's why the Noble Eightfold Path is really heavily grounded and rooted in the meditation practice itself. So we'll get into the words here now, and I'll show you what the better translation for them is based upon one's practice. Because with Pali was the spoken language at the time of the Buddha. This would be an analogy for this would be how Jesus in the Christian religion, he spoke Aramaic, which was a derived version of Hebrew, which was the language that was spoken by most of the priests at the time of Jesus, and was also the written language. And that's actually primarily why most of the Christian scriptures, they were actually translated into Greek and Roman. Not only was it because that's what most people were reading at the time of the world, but also in the Middle East, Aramaic didn't actually have a writing system at the time during the time of Jesus and the time in which that the Christian scriptures were written. So everybody who was there, who was learned, who actually wrote their text, as far as I know, every single one of the people who wrote the text, they were actually Hebrew. Even though the Apostle Paul was a Roman citizen, he was still a Jew and still was born in Judea, or in Tarsus, which was in the Middle East, and he spoke Aramaic. He also spoke Greek and Roman as well, so all of the people wrote everything in Greek because there was no writing system for Aramaic. There was no writing system for Pali at the time of the Buddha either, so most of it was oral tradition. And Pali was actually derived from the language of Sanskrit, which was the language of the Brahmins, people call them Hindus, who were the main priestly class at the time of during the time of the Buddha. And the writing system was in Sanskrit and all of that. And eventually later on, a few hundred years after the Buddha's death, Pali got a writing system of its own based upon the writing system of Sanskrit. So that's why we're going with the Pali language here. And the Pali language, I believe, if I remember correctly, most of this is also pretty much the same, minus one or two different types of letters in Sanskrit. But I'll be doing the main Pali version here. And with the Pali version, there's a word the word that's usually translated as right is sama. And now, while this is intellectually a correct translation, contextually, because with Pali, just as with Sanskrit, there are very many different words. Each word can have a different English meaning based upon its context, and can have a different meaning in the language itself based upon its context. And now the Buddha never taught strict absolutes. He never taught that there was a specific right or wrong. And if you have right view, you have to have wrong view. That's a very absolute thing there. There aren't really very many degrees of right or wrong. You're either right or you're wrong. But with the way the Buddha taught, he taught varying degrees of things until you get up to the point where you're at the most correct stage. So with Sama, being the context in which the Buddha taught, with there being no absolutes, but being various degrees of things, there's the universal law of degrees. A better translation, which is also intellectually correct, would be harmonious. And with harmony, there can be varying degrees of harmony till you get down to disharmony. And with disharmony, there can be varying degrees of disharmony until you get up to harmony. Just like with, I'll use the analogy of a rainbow. A rainbow, you'll see a rainbow, and you're taught that there are the various different colors that are separated into each different color. But that's basically the light spectrum, the spectrum of light that's being reflected through rain droplets, like a prism. And so that's the whole spectrum of light there. So it doesn't just separate. There's no line that says, red, green, blue, violet, indigo, etc. There's no specific line that separates those colors. that's the color, then there are varying degrees of the color till you get to the different color, and then there are varying degrees of that color till you get to another one, etc. So there could be a million different degrees of each of those colors in a rainbow, just as there can be varying different degrees of harmony and disharmony between direct harmony and direct disharmony. So there's no main absolute harmony or disharmony there. And so that's the best context for the word sama to be translated as. And with Pali, just as with Sanskrit, various words change in context based upon the word that comes before them. So with the first part of the Noble Eightfold Path, the Pali word is samaditi. Now that with the sama being translated as harmonious, we would translate in context view to something else. And now with the way that this is taught based upon your meditation practice, it is intellectually correct for DT to be translated as view. But what does view mean? It's not meaning actual sight. It's meaning how you view things, how you view the world. And so how do you view the world? What is a word about how a person views things personally? It is perspective. So a better translation for DT instead of being view would be perspective, a harmonious perspective. And now what is a harmonious perspective? Harmonious perspective is seeing things impersonally, seeing things without a self attached to them. This is the Buddhist teaching of not self. It is the not self is actually very confusing, so the better way to talk about the teaching of not self is to call it the teaching of the impersonal nature of things or phenomena. All things happen impersonally. They only occur because the conditions are right for them to occur. That's why in the Buddhist teaching, the Buddha actually rejects a notion of there being an actual creator God, a God that caused everything to come into being, because there was no evidence for it there. Because if all things exist, because the conditions are right for them to exist, there's actually no need for God to be there. Now, that's not saying there is no God, but who knows? That doesn't really matter as to whether or not there's a real actual God that caused all things to happen. It's just that there's not actually a need for a God to exist to keep everything in motion, because they just occur because the conditions are right for them to occur. And so that's what this is talking about here. It's an impersonal nature of things. Things happen because the conditions are right for them to happen. I'll take the analogy again of you stubbing your toe and it hurts. What are you doing with your mind whenever you feel that pain? Usually, for most people, they say, "Ow, that hurts, that's so painful, I want that pain to go away," and they'll, curse and say all types of harsh speech and even yell at their toe a lot. And usually that actually makes the pain worse, because what they're basically doing is another thing here. It'd be like if you put someone took a hot coal and put it in your hand, and you said, "Ow, that hurts really bad," and you just gripped it, and you just tightened your grip around the coal instead of just relaxing and letting the coal fall out of your hand. That's really what's happening here. It's your perspective. You're saying, this is me, this is my pain, my toe hurts, I'm in pain, I hurt. You're making everything personal. Whereas you stubbed your toe, yes, physically it is your toe because it's part of your mind-body process. But is that your pain? Did you make it come up? Did you say, well, my toe hasn't hurt in a while, so I gotta make it hurt? No, because even if you say, well, I gotta make my toe hurt, and you kick something and stub your toe, you still did not make the pain come up. The pain came up because conditions were right for it to come up. There was an excessive force against your toe, of your toe moving towards a hard object and hitting it and causing the nerves in your toe to send signals to your brain, that send signals of discomfort to your brain that interpreted it as pain. You did not actually physically make or intentionally make all those pains, all those receptors and those physical processes inside of your body that cause you to interpret something as pain to happen. Even if you decide, well, my toe hasn't hurt in a while, so I'm going to kick something really hard to make it hurt. You still did not make that pain come up, and there's no way that you can actually make that pain go away. So what do? Well, I stub my toe. There is pain, but it's not my pain. And that's the harmonious perspective. It's not my pain, it's just pain. And the pain arose because the conditions were right for it to arise. And that's harmonious perspective. And whenever you see it with that, you relax and you don't tense around that. You don't cause that craving, because craving manifests physically in the body as tension or tightness in the mind and in the body. And there's a membrane around your brain known as the meninges. And whenever you have a thought that you take personally, some type of personal thought, the meninges actually contracts around your brain and causes tension around your brain. And if you, and especially when pain comes up and you tense, you actually tense that area of your brain, and it actually causes pressure to go around your pineal gland, which is right between your eyes. It's typically the gland that's of your endocrine system that's associated with your third eye. It is also what produces your endorphins, which are your body's natural painkillers. And if you see things personally and tense up because of that pain, and you tense your mind up, that tension of the meninges, the membrane that surrounds your brain, actually causes tension in the pineal gland, which keeps your endorphins from being able to flow properly, which keep your natural painkillers from getting to your toe. So that causes the pain to get even worse, because the tension, just like I said with a hot coal, the tighter you grip a hot coal, the worse the pain gets, as opposed to you just letting it go and the pain eventually going away. So if you see it impersonally and say, this is not my pain, it's just pain, and you relax, that actually allows the natural painkillers in your body, your endorphins, which are 10 times stronger than morphine, to eventually get to your toe, and it'll actually cause the pain to release itself, to lessen, and it'll eventually go away. You may not even know about it the next day. You may forget all about it. And this also, your endorphins also naturally help your body to heal faster. So the more you take the pain personally, and the more you tense up around it, and the more you talk about how you hate pain and how you want it to go away, the less you'll heal properly. And this is also why you'll see people, and even psychologists have started figuring this out, people with a more negative, cynical aspect of life are typically sicker more and for longer periods of time, and have more health issues than people who are naturally happy. Because of their tense lifestyle, they keep the natural body feel-good chemicals and hormones in your body from flowing that help your body to heal faster and to live longer. So there's also a very physical aspect to doing this. And now, how does this relate to your meditation practice? Well, in meditation, you deal with having a positive meditation object, like just say your breath. That's basically a neutral one, but it's more positive than having something negative. Or you have a feeling of loving kindness or compassion, something of that nature, and you keep feeling that. And and what you do is eventually, as things happen to do, because your mind happens to wander until you get more advanced in your meditation practice, you whenever that happens, you see it for what it is. You don't see that thought as my thought. Once you realize it's distracted, you see, oh, a thought came up. Then you return back to your meditation object and you relax, and you come back without being very harsh and hard, like, oh, my thoughts are getting away from me. I need to get back to my meditation object. And you turn real hard back to it, which brings the craving, which is the tension and tightness in your mind and in your body, and you bring that back to your meditation object, which actually doesn't bring any progress to your meditation practice. So having that harmonious perspective of seeing things impersonally, that is actually, especially in meditation, that's actually what helps to advance your meditation practice. Now, with harmonious perspective, we go down to the second part of the Noble Eightfold Path. The word in Pali is Sammasankappa. It's usually translated as right thought. However, with the contextual translation, we translate it as harmonious imaging. And this is dealing with the image that you're having in your mind during your meditation practice. Like I said earlier, the meditation object, that's the image you're trying to keep in your mind to keep on the positive aspect, especially when the negative thoughts and the craving come up. That's your home base in your meditation. That's the positive that you come back to after releasing those discursive thoughts that have brought craving up in your mind. And so that's, what type of thoughts are you keeping up in your mind? And now this also, as I said, these can relate to your lifestyle too. And you do your best to take your meditation with you into life. And so this would also be like if you're at the grocery store, what type of image are you keeping in your mind then? Are you thinking, oh man, I'm so tired of being here, I don't like grocery shopping, I just want to hurry up and get out of here, this line is so long? Or are you just keeping harmonious thoughts of wishing people happiness, seeing all the people in front of you happy? Because the majority of people, unless you're living in a place with totally, fully enlightened beings, or beings who are a whole group of beings who are on the path to enlightenment, which is extremely rare, especially in this day and age, to be in just a community of people just like that. Most of those people are thinking the same thing that you are. So you help to alleviate the tension that's going on by all those people thinking that by bringing a wholesome in there. And there's a vibration in those images, in those thoughts, that helps to negate the vibrations that are happening from those other people, those negative vibrations. They cancel each other out with your positive ones. And this can also affect the world around you about harmonious imaging, because you could eventually make the world a better place. How do you want to help people? Like with, the tsunamis and the earthquakes that have been going on, and there's nothing you can physically do to go there and help them. How else can you help them? Well, send loving and kind thoughts to those people. That's one way that you can help to make the world a better place. There have actually been tests done where people have gone into areas that are war zones, and groups of people, and they've sat down and they've sat there meditating, thinking upon peace and harmony, and the war and the tension in the area has actually ceased during the time that they were there. And then whenever they left, the tensions increased and went back to the levels that they were before those people got there. So how you keep an image in your mind and where you send it can actually have a very beneficial effect on other people. Now we get to the third part of the Noble Eightfold Path. This is called, in Pali, Samavaka. It's usually translated as right speech, but better contextual translation, because of how we're doing it based upon the meditation practice, would be harmonious communication. And now, harmonious communication, this is not dealing with specifically your communication with other people, especially whenever it comes to meditation. This is actually your internal dialogue, your communication with yourself. Whenever you're meditating, if a thought comes up that distracts you from your meditation object, do you come back to it and say, oh gosh, there was another thought that came up, I'm doing such horrible meditation? Or do you think, oh, there was just a thought that came up, I'll release that and go back to my meditation? Because whenever you're meditating, if let's say you're meditating for 30 minutes, if in the course of those 30 minutes, 50 times a thought comes up that distracts you from your meditation object, but 50 times you release that thought, you relax, and you return to your meditation object, you're actually doing good meditation that will cause benefit for you. The only thing that would not cause benefit was if you had a thought that came up and distracted you, and you felt that that thought was more important than your meditation. So you kept thinking those thoughts and going along with that train of thought throughout the rest of your time that you're supposed to be meditating, and you aren't actually meditating anymore. So keeping the proper speech with yourself, not calling yourself names, not thinking about how horrible you're doing the meditation, but giving yourself positive personal speech, is a good thing that helps to keep your meditation going. Because a lot of people who give themselves harsh speech, I know I've done it before myself, whenever I first started getting into meditation, and I would think, man, I'm doing such horrible meditation. I can't calm my mind down. I can't quiet my mind or anything. I eventually gave up until I found out that, hey, I shouldn't be doing that. If I give myself positive speech, and it doesn't matter if my mind wanders as long as I come back to my object of meditation. Then I went back to it with that frame of mindset. I realized, my meditation practice improved greatly. So it's all about how you communicate with yourself, and you should communicate with yourself positively in order to have positive changes and very positive progress in your meditation. Now, number 4 on the Noble Eightfold Path, in Pali it's Samma Kammanta. It's usually translated as right action. However, a better contextual translation for the meditation practice is harmonious movement. And now, what is harmonious movement? We're actually talking about the movements of your mind. This comes about to the word mindfulness. The word mindfulness is basically sort of like the word God. Everybody's supposed to know what it means, but nobody actually really knows how to explain it. Well, I'll give you a definition that one of my meditation teachers has given me, and that is mindfulness is being aware of how mind's attention moves in the present moment. It's being aware of the movements of mind from moment to moment as it occurs. That's another definition to help hopefully give better understanding of that. That means, what are you doing in the present moment with your mind? As I talked about the imaging earlier, let's say you're walking to your car from work or leaving the grocery store. What are you doing with your mind at that time? Are you just thinking nonsense thoughts, or are you keeping positive thoughts in mind? Are you giving positive thoughts out to other people? Giving positive thoughts to yourself? And whenever something comes up to distract your mind, are you seeing that for what it is, that it's just a thought? Are you releasing it and you're returning back to giving loving and kind thoughts to yourself or others? That's what this is really talking about here. It's all the movements of your mind. And then with harmonious movement, we come down to number 5 in the Noble Eightfold Path. It's in Pali, it's Sama Ajiva and Sama Ajiva, and that usually translate as right livelihood. Here we translate it as harmonious lifestyle. Now, this is the main one that actually does deal with how you live your life. And this is, are you living your life in harmony with your meditation practice? Let's say you're trying, with meditation, you're trying to achieve an end to suffering, having a calm and clear, pure mind. Are you, do you constantly go and watch horror movies that have a whole lot of blood and gore and gratuitous violence and sex, etc., and then trying to meditate? Because that usually doesn't work. There's a story one of my teachers gives about one of his students. She was constantly having nightmares, and he asked, well, why do you think you're having nightmares? She said, well, it usually happens after I go to the movies. And he said, what types of movies are you watching? And she said, well, I like horror movies. And he said, well, don't go watch horror movies. And she said, well, I really like horror movies. And he said, well, don't come complaining to me about your nightmares and why you can't meditate properly. Because, having seeing that constant mindset with horror movies and gratuitous violence and gratuitous sex, rape, things of that nature, there's an underlying cause of aversion within those types of images and those types of themes. And whenever you watch them, whatever you watch and whatever you listen to, it has an impression upon your mind. No matter whether it's a small or a great impression upon your mind, it's still an impression. And whenever you meditate, you actually bring those impressions from your daily life with you. And while that's not the end game of the meditation, because eventually you learn to purify your mind beyond those, bringing a great deal of underlying aversion based upon the images that you see, it takes a lot longer for you to progress in your meditation practice, because basically you have to work through that aversion that's coming up and bringing restlessness in your mind that causes an increased amount of distracting thoughts to come up. And that's like with reading the newspaper too. The majority of things that are in the newspaper are very negative. I know I work at a grocery store as my main job, And part of my job, especially if I open in the morning, just to put out the newspapers. And I'll I'll occasionally glance at an article or two while I'm putting them out. And the majority of articles that are on the first page are typically articles in a negative sense, even things that can be considered um, neutral subjects. Um, are more often than not, at least 3/4 of the time, um, written in a negative light. Because it's like, well, yeah, he did this thing or she did that thing, but why didn't they do this? Or it could have been done better, or it's caused a lot of opposition from this other group, or a lot of criticism from these people. And while, they're trying to give a fair, a quote, fair and balanced version of the news, casting it in such a negative light as opposed to saying, a lot of people, there's a lot of criticism and a lot of, support from these different sides. Let's give both sides, They typically say what the person does and then give the criticism of it. They rarely ever give a lot of the overwhelming support and positive comments behind it, because the news is meant to be cast in a certain light, and typically things that are more dramatic and more negative in nature are typically what catch people's attention, because the underlying concept is we're in a world of suffering, so people are more drawn to suffering, because the Buddha talked about that. Whatsoever you incline your mind, whatsoever you think and ponder on, that is the inclination of your mind. So the more you think and ponder on things of a negative aspect, or things with underlying aversions, such as horror movies or the wars in the Middle East, your mind starts to incline toward underlying aversion or a negative mindset, which helps to slow down the level of progress for your meditation. It makes it very difficult for you to progress in your meditation. So that's why you really need to have that harmonious lifestyle. You need to have a lifestyle that's in harmony with your meditation practice and your practice of following the path, the Buddha's path to an end of suffering. But with being focused on suffering, you can't get to the end of suffering. You should focus more on an end to suffering, a cessation of suffering, the happiness. That's not saying to look through rose-colored glasses and ignore what's going on in the world, but see what's going on in the world from an impersonal perspective. Like, yeah, that's going on. Let me send compassion and loving and kind thoughts to those people that it's affecting. Let me send loving and kind and compassionate thoughts to myself, so that I will not be affected by it. There's actually a teaching of the Buddha where he actually talks about this, and he says that your mind, that you'll have people who talk to you harsh or positive, or they'll talk to you negative or positive, harsh or kind. They'll speak to you timely or untimely, etc. And he says that you should train your mind thus: I will be unaffected by those thoughts. I will be unperturbed by those thoughts, and I will keep in my mind thoughts of loving and kind thoughts and compassion toward the people who are saying those things. And I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have the exact text right in front of me. But that is one of his teachings. And so that's what you do whenever you see those things and whenever you hear about those things, when you have people that come up to you that speak to you negatively, you keep that in your mind. I constantly do that a lot because what I do at my job at the grocery store that I work at, I'm what is known as customer service staff. I'm a supervisor. I have a supervisor position. And I deal with a lot of the complaints of our cashiers and the people who bag the groceries for customers and get the carts. They're called front service clerks. And I deal with a lot of the complaints. They come up here and they tell me about, this thing that a customer said, that thing that a customer said, etc., or their negative interactions with other employees that work with us. I also deal with customer complaints, disgruntled employees, and things like that. And I've had customers on numerous occasions call me some very memorable names. And with that job, if you take those things very personally and you allow them to affect you, you you wouldn't last very long. And there are a lot of people in my job who are in those positions. They have a very negative, cynical mindset and a cynical way of seeing things as a result of the constant bombardment, and they're allowing it to affect them. So whenever I go to work every day, I keep in my mind that people can feel however they want to feel, and they can say whatever they want to say, but I won't be affected by it. I'll keep in my mind thoughts of loving and kind thoughts toward myself and all the people I come into contact with. And usually I start my workday with a smile, I end my workday with a smile, and I have a smile all throughout. And even whenever I usually have customer complaints, the majority of the time, they, no matter how angry they are, the majority of the time, I'm not saying all of the time, but the majority of the time, they leave with a smile on their face, because the way that you deal with the world around you can have either a positive or a negative effect on it. Or a neutral effect too, because it's not all absolute positive or negative. But I choose to have a positive effect on the world around me. So I keep a smile on my face, loving and kind thoughts towards others and myself, and that's how I deal with that. So I don't have a negative aspect. And while my job can be difficult at times, I live in a resort community, so right now during the summer we're extremely busy and have a 5 or 6 time increase in the amount of customers that we deal with, or more. I still enjoy my job very much because of that. And you can do that too with anyone. Just make sure that beforehand you keep those thoughts of loving, kind thoughts towards yourself and others, and keep that mindset that I will not be disturbed by what they say. But the thing is too is that you can't just say that before you go into a horror movie and expect not to be bombarded by that horror movie. The horror movie is for entertainment purposes. That's not really your daily life, but it does have an effect on you. And if you're constantly bombarded by stuff like that, because like in my job, I'm not constantly affected by negativity and aversion. The majority of people, I would say probably 90% of the people I deal with, are very happy, and they're not angry. They're very happy. They have a smile on their face. Or at least they say that they enjoy seeing me today. Customer and fellow employee alike. But if you go into constantly seeing horror movies or things of that nature, that's constant bombardment of an underlying aversion there, so that will still have a negative effect there. But this is talking about daily life with actual lifestyle. But if you go see those things for entertainment purposes that are negative, they can still have a negative effect on you. So it's what you put into your mind that really affects how your meditation practice will be, because your mind will tend to lean toward whatever you put most into your mind. Now we get down to number 6 on the Noble Eightfold Path. The word in Pali is samavayama. It's typically translated as, there are a couple words for this. There's right practice, right effort is probably the most well-known one. Here we have it as harmonious practice, because practice does work here. And this practice is your meditation practice, your harmonious practice of your meditation. Now, one of my meditation teachers taught me a 6-point system about having right effort or harmonious practice in your meditation. And that is, while you're meditating, you have a specific meditation object that you're focused on, either your breath or feelings of loving, kind thoughts towards yourself and others, something of that nature. And that's what you're focused on openly, while relaxing mind and body to remove craving. And what you do whenever there's a distracting thought that comes up, in the 6-point process, you recognize, it's called the 6 R's. You recognize that there's a distracting thought. You release the distracting thought. You relax any tension or tightness that's in your mind and in your body, because when a distracting thought comes up, there's the underlying craving there. The reason it distracted you is because you took that thought personally, whether consciously or subconsciously. You took that thought personally, and that causes the craving to arise that distracts you from it. And with the craving, coming up, there's the tension and tightness in mind and body. So you have to relax mind and body first before returning to your meditation object. So you relax mind and body, then you re-smile. And why do you smile during your meditation? You smile during your meditation because, first off, the Buddha said, we're the happy ones. This is a way to end suffering. And one of the best ways, outward signs of happiness, is smiling. So you smile during meditation, and there was a study done, I think at the University of Wyoming or Vermont or somewhere, where they did a psychological study about facial expression. And they noticed that whenever the corners of your mouth were uplifted, like in a smile, your brain automatically thought that you were supposed to be happy, whether you were actually happy or not. So basically, if you have a smile, eventually your mind will think, well, I'm smiling, so I should be happy, and you will eventually develop a mind of happiness. So we keep the smile going in our meditation to help us with that. And also, whenever you're smiling as opposed to frowning, there are less muscles being used in your mouth or in your face to keep that frown. So, so there's less tension in your face. So that helps to lessen any tension that'll be in your mind and in your body as well. So after you re-smile, you return to your meditation object. And then number 6, well, let me get in the mirror there. Let me get in the camera there. Number 6, you repeat the process as necessary. And that's the 6-point system known as the 6 R's that you use for harmonious practice during meditation. You recognize, this is the first R, you recognize the distracting thought. Second, you release the distracting thought. Third, you relax any tension and tightness in mind and body, because that's how craving manifests. Fourth, you re-smile. Fifth, you return to your meditation object, which is your home base. That's the positive that you're keeping in mind to help root out craving. And then 6, you repeat the process as necessary. That doesn't mean you keep repeating it over and over again. You only repeat it whenever another thought comes up that distracts you from your meditation object. And that is harmonious practice in a nutshell, basically. Now with number 7, we get down to number 7 after number 6 in the Noble Eightfold Path. The word in Pali is samasati. It's usually translated as harmonious mindfulness. And while it's kind of correct, contextually we translate it as, well, it's not translated as harmonious mindfulness, it's translated as right mindfulness. And while that's technically correct, better contextual translation is harmonious attention. And now what is this attention? This is actually the attention that you're having with what's going on in your mind. And that actually is dealing with what are known as the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The 4 foundations of mindfulness are mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of mind objects. Now, mindfulness of body, that's the mindfulness of your physical body. Any feelings that you're having going on, your breath, how your hands are resting, whether you have them folded over or sitting on your knees during your meditation practice, the straightness of your back, because you need to keep a fairly straight back for your energy to run properly without it doling out your mind, and also to keep your if you know about like the chakra system and everything, this is how you keep your during meditation, your kundalini. There is actual kundalini energy running through your chakra system, and if you keep your back straight, it allows it to properly flow, which keeps you from getting dull and keeps blockages from occurring that can hinder your meditation practice. And this is actually talked about in a certain form by the Buddha as well, with regard to the energy channel in your back. That's mindfulness of body. You're being mindfulness of your physical body. Now, mindfulness of feeling, that's not mindfulness of your emotions, because most people tend to think of feeling or feelings as being emotional. This is actually dealing with all aspects of feeling. It's dealing with the physical feeling in your body, which is different from your actual body. Okay, because you're dealing with the mindfulness of your body about how your body is positioned in the meditation practice. Because if you start to slump over, you need to be aware of your slump, and you need to pick your posture back up. But now feeling, that's dealing with what you're feeling in your body. Do you feel any tightness or tension in your body that you need to relax? Do you feel any pain that you need to, you don't focus on the pain, you actually feel the pain and you release the pain. You don't focus on it. You see it impersonally. Do you feel any pain that you need to see impersonally? Is that pain what is known as a meditation pain? If you get out of the meditation position, does it go away? Or is it a physical pain? If you get out of the meditation position, does it stay? And if it stays, once you finish your meditation, you've gotten up from wherever you're sitting at, either in a chair or on the floor, whatever, then you might need, in your next meditation session, you might need to adjust your position to fix that. Now the third one is mindfulness of mind. Now, what is mindfulness of mind? Is this mindfulness of thoughts? Well, no. Mindfulness of thoughts, that's mind objects. Mindfulness of mind is what is your mind doing? That's different from thoughts, because is your mind, this is the attention that your mind is keeping. This is the mindfulness aspect. Is your mind paying attention to these certain thoughts that deal with craving, or is it paying attention to your meditation object? That's what mindfulness of mind is. Now, mindfulness of mind objects, that is actually mindfulness of thoughts, because thoughts are the objects of your mind. And with this, there are thoughts that will come up in your mind. Some will distract you from your meditation object, and some will not distract you from your meditation object. And you need to be aware of the two, because I dealt with this a lot whenever I first really got into my meditation practice, was that I was actually doing the 6 R's that I talked about earlier with every thought that came up, regardless. I was being indiscriminate toward my thoughts and not realizing which ones were pulling me away from my meditation object and which ones were just there and I was letting them pass by me like, a cloud. So you need to be aware of that. Are you able to sit in meditation and still focus on your meditation object while you are aware that a thought is going on, which is that's a thought that's not distracting you? Or are you focused on that thought and no longer aware of your meditation object, either your breath or your feeling and things like that? And this is kind of how, if you daydream, and you stop focusing, if you're like reading a book and then you start daydreaming about what might be happening in the book with what you've read already, and you're no longer focused on reading the book, and so you have to go back and reread the last few sentences that you just zoned out on. That's what this is dealing with. So that's a distracting thought. That's basically the same concept as a distracting thought. And so you need to be aware of those things. And that's what the mindfulness of mind objects is about. Being aware of the thoughts to make sure that it's either just a random thought that's just passing by and you're aware of it, but it's not distracting you, or is it something that has actually pulled you away from your meditation object? So you need to do the 6 R's to return to your meditation object, to your home base, to continue the cycle of rooting out the craving from your life. And now, with that, we come down to number 8 of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is known as Sama Samadhi. And now, usually, this is translated as harmonious or right concentration. It's translated as right concentration. And while Sama is intellectually, as I've said before, translated properly as right, contextually, it's better translated as harmonious in how we're using it. Samadhi does not actually mean concentration. This actually is historically known to have been a word that was never used before the Buddha was teaching. This is actually a word that the Buddha made up himself. Samadhi is a word that the Buddha actually made up. And it can be translated in a few ways that are correct based upon how the Buddha taught it. Now, there are two roots of Pali words that are in this that make up this one word. There's sama, which means tranquil, and di, which means wisdom. So it's tranquil wisdom. This is actually insight. What is actually should be considered insight based upon how the Buddha taught it, as opposed to vipassana. Because before the Buddha made up samadhi, he used the word samatha vipassana, which means tranquil insight. And you'll notice that usually the majority of the time in any of the Buddhist teachings, whenever he used samatha or vipassana, he used them in the same sentence. And typically they're used as a hyphenated word, samatha vipassana. And then eventually the Buddha made up this word samadhi. And then eventually the Brahmins came in and liked the word, so they decided to use it for their concentration practice and call it concentration. And the word is kind of stuck as being translated right like that, though it is incorrect. So samadhi can be translated as tranquil wisdom. It can be translated as insight or tranquil insight. And then it can also be translated as collectedness of mind, which is how we're translating it here based upon the meditation practice. And now, what is collectedness of mind? Many people can think that collectedness of mind is a collected mind. You can think of concentration. But the problem with that is that in concentration, most people think of concentration, and especially with like the Brahmanical or Hindu practice of concentration meditation, it's basically focusing on one thing to the exclusion of everything else. It's like how I was talking about earlier with harmonious attention, about how you read a book and you get so focused on something that you actually almost miss what you're talking about because you get focused on a daydream. It'd be like if you were actually focused on reading that book to the point that somebody's talking to you and you don't even hear them talking. That's being concentrated, to where you don't hear anything, you don't see anything beyond what you're focused on. Somebody could probably tap you on the head and you may not even feel it because you get so concentrated, so focused on what you're reading. Whereas with harmonious collectedness of mind, with a collected mind, you don't get concentrated to something to the exclusion of everything else. Like whenever you're in samadhi meditation, as the Buddha taught, you're actually being openly focused on your meditation object, to where you hear certain things, you smell certain things. Your eyes are typically closed, but if your eyes were open, you would see things. If somebody came up and touched you, you would feel it. The thing is that you don't allow, it does not disturb your mind or make your mind shake away from your meditation object. That's the difference. You don't get so focused on it that you exclude everything else and you can't hear or see or know what's going on around you. That's the difference. It's just you see those things, you know what those things are going on, but they don't affect you during your meditation practice. So that's what harmonious collectedness of mind is really dealing with. And whenever you have these together, this is the path that leads to the cessation of suffering, that leads to enlightenment and to liberation from suffering. Now, with this, it's not you have to go to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 all the way down to number 8, and they reveal themselves in sequence. You need all of them together. It's just like driving a car. You need proper eyesight to drive. That's the harmonious perspective. And then you need your proper limbs and coordination to be able to drive the car effectively, and that's the rest of the 7 aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path. So you need all of those together to be able to drive your car, so to speak, of your meditation practice, to be able to reach your destination of liberation or enlightenment and an end to suffering. So that's what this is really dealing with here. And all of those together is what brings that about. So this is the end of my talk here. And as I said at the beginning, I'm going to tell you what I like to do at the end of each of my talks. Now, the Buddha, he was very big on generosity and being generous towards others. And that means generosity of body, speech, and mind, not just giving money to others. And the Buddha said one of the best ways to give generosity to people, because if you hear someone give a Dhamma talk, as what I've just given, the person giving the Dhamma talk gains much merit from giving the talk, and the person listening intently to the talk gains much merit or good karma from listening to the talk. So one of the best ways to give generosity is to share that merit with other beings. So there's a bit of a prayer that I'll be saying at the end of each of my talks from now on, that shares the merit with all beings. So we're sharing the merit or the good karma that we've gained, me from giving this talk to you and you from listening intently to this talk. And so once you know it, you can follow along with me if you'd like. So I'll share the merit now. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Now also the word that I just said 3 times, sadhu, that is actually a Pali word, and it just means well done. And so that just ends that. It's basically the Buddhist equivalent of the word amen that's used in Christianity, just so you understand what that means. Thank you for listening to this talk, and I will see you next time.